I believed her when she said 32. I believed her when she touched my hand that first night and told me I made her feel safe. I believed every word, until the day I found her real ID hidden in her makeup bag. She wasn't 34, she was 47. And that lie? It was just the beginning. My name is Clifton. I'm 65 years old, and I need to tell you what happened in Nueva Ecija. Her hand was warm on mine. That's what I remember most from that first jeepney ride through Nueva Ecija. The tropical heat pressed against my skin, thick and wet, but Grace's hand felt cool somehow. Light. She was laughing at something I'd said, probably something stupid about the traffic or the roosters we'd passed on the road. Her smile was bright and easy, the kind that made you want to keep talking just to see it again. I looked at her and thought, this is it. This is what I came here for. Not the beaches. Not the cheap beer. Not the retirement fantasy everyone back in Tampa kept talking about. This, her, the way she looked at me like I mattered. The driver swerved around a pothole and she squeezed my hand tighter. You okay? She asked. Her voice was soft, careful. I nodded. Yeah, I'm good. And I was. For the first time in 2 years, I was actually good. I'd left Tampa 3 weeks ago with one suitcase and a bank account that had more money than purpose. The divorce had gutted me. Not the paperwork. Not the lawyers. The silence. Coming home to an empty house every night. Microwaving dinners I didn't taste. Watching TV shows I didn't care about. My ex-wife had taken the furniture, the dog, and whatever was left of my dignity. She'd looked at me during the settlement and said, "You were never really here anyway, Clifton." And maybe she was right. Maybe I'd checked out years ago. I don't know. What I do know is that I couldn't stay in that house anymore. So I didn't. I sold it. I cashed out my $401k early. I bought a one-way ticket to Manila and told myself I'd figure it out when I got there. And then I met Grace. She was standing outside a small cafe in Angeles City, scrolling through her phone, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. I walked past her twice before I got the nerve to say hello. When I finally did, she looked up and smiled. Just like that. No hesitation, no judgment. She said, "You look lost." I laughed. "I am." She tilted her head. "You want company?" We talked for 3 hours. She told me she was 32, a widow, raising a young son on her own. Her husband had died in a motorcycle accident 4 years ago. She worked part-time at a local resort, but it wasn't enough. Life was hard, but she was managing. She had this way of talking that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. She asked questions. She listened. She didn't look at her phone once. When I told her about the divorce, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "I'm sorry," she said, and I believed her. The jeepney slowed and turned down a narrow dirt road. Grace leaned forward and said something to the driver in Tagalog. He nodded, and a minute later we stopped in front of a small concrete house with a metal roof and a handful of chickens scratching in the yard. "This is it," she said. She looked at me, almost shy. "It's not much." I shook my head. "It's perfect," and I meant it. It wasn't the house, it was the idea of it, a place that wasn't empty, a place where someone was waiting. A woman in her 50s came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Grace waved. "That's my aunt," she said. "She lives next door. She helps me with Miguel." Miguel, her son. I hadn't met him yet, but I'd seen pictures. A skinny kid with a serious face and his mother's eyes. Grace said he was shy around strangers, but he'd warm up. The aunt smiled at me and said something in Tagalog. Grace translated. She says, "Welcome." She says you have a kind face. I laughed. "Tell her thank you." Grace squeezed my hand one more time before letting go. "Come on. Let me show you around." The inside of the house was small but clean. A living room with a single couch and a box fan. A tiny kitchen with a 2-burner stove. 2 bedrooms, separated by a thin curtain. Grace pointed to the smaller room. "That's Miguel's. He's at school right now. You'll meet him tonight." She led me to the other room. There was a double bed with a faded blue blanket and a wooden dresser with a cracked mirror. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, watching me. "What do you think?" she asked. I turned to look at her. "I think I'm glad I came." She smiled. That smile. The one that made everything else disappear. Me too. That night we sat on the porch and drank San Miguel beer while the sun set over the rice fields. She told me about her life, about how hard it had been after her husband died, about the bills she couldn't pay, about the nights she cried because she didn't know how she'd feed her son. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't try to fix it. I just listened. And when she finished, I said, "You're stronger than you think." She looked at me, her eyes glassy in the dim light. "You really think so?" I nodded. "I know so." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Thank you, Clifton." We sat there until the mosquitoes got too bad and the fan inside called us back. That night I lay in her bed, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, dogs barking, someone's radio playing soft music, the distant hum of a motorcycle. Grace was next to me, her breathing slow and steady. I stared at the ceiling and thought about how different this felt from Tampa, how alive, how real. I thought, maybe this is what starting over looks like. Maybe this is what I've been looking for all along. I closed my eyes and let myself believe it. I let myself believe her, and for a while, that was enough. I woke up to the smell of fried rice and eggs. Grace was in the kitchen, humming softly, her hair still messy from sleep. I stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, contentment. "Morning," I said. She turned and smiled. "Morning. You hungry?" I nodded. "Starving." She handed me a plate piled high with garlic fried rice, a fried egg, and some kind of dried fish I didn't recognize. I sat at the small wooden table and took a bite. It was good, really good. "You like it?" she asked, sitting across from me with her own plate. "I love it." She looked pleased. "Good. I'll teach you how to make it." We ate in comfortable silence, the fan whirring above us, the morning light filtering through the thin curtains. After breakfast, she introduced me to Miguel. He was small for his age, maybe 8 or 9, with dark eyes that didn't quite meet mine. He stood in the doorway of his room, clutching a worn backpack. "Miguel, this is Clifton," Grace said in English. Then she said something in Tagalog. He nodded. "Hello?" His voice was barely above a whisper. I smiled. "Hey, Miguel. Nice to meet you." He didn't say anything else, just nodded again and slipped past us toward the door. Grace sighed. "He's shy. Give him time." I watched him walk down the dirt road toward the main street where I assumed the school was. "He seems like a good kid." "He is." She started clearing the plates. "He's been through a lot. His father's death, moving here. It's hard for him." I helped her wash the dishes in a plastic basin. "What can I do to help?" She looked at me, surprised. "Help?" "Yeah. With Miguel. With bills. Whatever you need." Her eyes softened. "Clifton, you don't have to do that." I shrugged. "I want to." And I did. I wanted to feel useful. I wanted to be part of something. I wanted to matter. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a routine. I'd wake up with Grace, help her with breakfast, walk Miguel to school sometimes, spend the afternoons fixing things around the house. The roof leaked in one corner. The door to the bathroom didn't close properly. The fan in the living room made a grinding noise. Small things, but they added up. Grace was grateful. She'd kiss my cheek and say, "I don't know what I'd do without you," and I'd feel like a man again, like I had a purpose. One evening, we were sitting on the porch after dinner, sharing a beer, when she brought it up. "Clifton, I need to ask you something." I looked at her. "What is it?" She hesitated. "It's Miguel's school fees. They're due next week and I don't have enough." I waited. "How much do you need?" $800. She said it quickly, like she was embarrassed. I hate asking. I really do. But I don't know what else to do. "If I don't pay, they'll kick him out." I didn't think. I just nodded. "I'll take care of it." Her face lit up. "Really?" "Really." She threw her arms around me. "Thank you. Thank you so much." I hugged her back, feeling her body against mine, warm and solid. "It's okay. We're in this together, right?" She pulled back and looked at me, her eyes wet. "Right." I transferred the money the next day, $800 from my checking account to hers. It felt good. It felt like I was doing the right thing. A week later, she came to me again. This time it was her mother. "She's sick," Grace said, her voice shaking. "She needs medicine. The doctor said $500. I didn't hesitate. "I'll send it," she cried. She held my face in her hands and said, "You're an angel. You know that?" I wasn't an angel. I was just a lonely man trying to buy his way into a family. But I didn't say that. I just kissed her forehead and told her everything would be okay. That night, we talked about the future. We were lying in bed, the fan spinning above us, the sound of the neighborhood settling into sleep. "What do you want, Clifton?" she asked. I thought about it. I want peace. I want to wake up next to someone who cares about me. I want to build something that lasts. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What if we started a business? Something small. A little shop. We could sell snacks, drinks, things the neighbors need. It wouldn't make us rich, but it would help." I liked the idea. "Yeah, we could do that." She turned on her side to face me. "You really think so?" "I know so." She smiled and kissed me. "I love you, Clifton." It was the first time she'd said it. I froze. "You do?" She nodded. "I do. I know it's fast, but I can't help it. You make me feel safe." I kissed her back. "I love you too." And I did. Or at least I thought I did. It's hard to tell the difference when you're that desperate to be loved back. But that moment, lying there in the dark, her body warm against mine, her voice soft in my ear, I believed it. I believed we could build something. A few days later, I was looking for a pen. Grace was out shopping and Miguel was at school. I rummaged through the drawer in the living room, pushing aside old receipts and batteries and broken lighters. That's when I saw it, a driver's license. I picked it up, just glancing at it, not really thinking. The photo was Grace, younger, maybe, but definitely her. I looked at the name, Grace Dela Cruz. That matched. Then I looked at the birth date, the 12th of June, 1990. I did the math in my head. That would make her 34, but she'd told me she was 32. I stared at the card, confused. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe she'd said 34, and I remembered it wrong. Grace came home a few minutes later, carrying plastic bags of vegetables and rice. She saw me holding the license. "Oh," she said. She walked over and took it from my hand, laughing a little. "I was looking for that." "Your birth date," I said. "It says 1990. She waved her hand dismissively. "The government. They always mess things up. I've been trying to get it fixed for years. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to press, but I didn't." I just nodded. "Yeah, that makes sense." She kissed my cheek. "Come, help me put these away." I followed her into the kitchen, the license already forgotten. Or at least I told myself it was forgotten. But that night, lying in bed, I thought about it. Why would the government get her birth date wrong? And if they did, why hadn't she fixed it? It was such a small thing, but it stuck in my mind like a splinter. Still, I pushed it away. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was lucky to have her, and I let it go. Because the truth is, I wanted to let it go. I wanted to believe everything she told me. Because the alternative, that she was lying, that this was all fake, was too painful to even consider. So I didn't. I just held her closer that night and told myself everything was fine. Everything was going to be fine. The money requests started coming faster. At first, I didn't notice. Or maybe I did notice, but I didn't want to admit it. Grace needed $800 for Miguel's tuition, then $500 for her mother's medicine, then $300 for groceries because the market prices had gone up, then another $400 because the roof needed repairs and the rains were coming. I sent it all. Every time she asked, I sent it. I'd open my banking app, transfer the money, and feel this strange mix of pride and dread. Pride because I could help, dread because I was starting to wonder if there was an end to it. One night, I was sitting on the porch alone. Grace was inside, putting Miguel to bed. I pulled up my bank statement on my phone and started adding up the transfers. In 6 weeks, I'd sent her almost $3,000. $3,000. I stared at the screen, my stomach turning. That was a lot. That was more than I'd planned to spend in 3 months. I heard the door open behind me. Grace came out, smiling, and sat next to me. Miguel's asleep. He's so tired. I locked my phone and put it in my pocket. That's good. She leaned her head on my shoulder. You okay? You seem quiet. I hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. I took a breath. Your mom? Is she feeling better? Grace nodded. Much better. The medicine really helped. That's good. I'd love to meet her sometime. Her body stiffened just a little. Oh, yeah. Soon. Soon. She sat up, turning to face me. She's just, traditional. She doesn't like meeting new people, especially foreigners. She needs time. I nodded slowly. How much time? Grace looked away. I don't know, Clifton. Why are you pushing this? I'm not pushing. I just thought after 6 weeks, maybe she'd want to meet the guy who's been helping pay for her medicine. Her face hardened. Is that what this is about? The money? No. That's not what I meant. Because if you're going to throw that in my face every time we talk, maybe you should just stop helping. I felt like I'd been slapped. Grace, I'm not throwing anything in your face. I'm just asking to meet your family. She stood up. I need space. She went inside and I sat there, alone, feeling like I'd done something wrong but not knowing what. I replayed the conversation in my head. Had I been too pushy? Was I being unreasonable? Maybe she was right. Maybe I was making it about the money. I went to bed that night on the couch. Grace didn't come out to talk to me. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She made breakfast, kissed my cheek, asked me if I wanted to go to the market with her. I said yes, because I didn't know what else to do. But something had shifted. I started noticing things, small things. The way she'd glance at her phone and then put it face down when I walked into the room. The way she'd step outside to take calls, speaking in rapid Tagalog I couldn't understand. The way she'd smile at me, bright and easy, whenever I asked about the money. One afternoon I was looking for a pen in her bag. She'd told me it was fine, that I could grab one if I needed it. I unzipped the side pocket and saw a second phone. Not her regular phone. A different one, cheap, a prepaid burner. I picked it up. It was locked. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart pounding. Why did she have a second phone? I heard her footsteps coming up the path. I shoved the phone back in her bag and zipped it closed, my hands shaking. When she came inside, I was sitting on the couch, pretending to read a book. Hey, she said, setting down a bag of groceries. Find the pen? I nodded. Yeah, got it. That night, she was extra affectionate. She climbed into my lap while we watched TV, running her fingers through my hair, kissing my neck. I'm sorry about yesterday, she said softly. I didn't mean to snap at you. I held her, feeling her warmth, her weight. It's okay. I just get stressed, With Miguel, with my mom, with everything. But you're so good to me. You're my everything. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to sink into that moment and let it wash away the doubt. But the phone was there, in my mind, a little black rectangle that didn't make sense. Grace, I said. Who were you talking to earlier? On the phone? She pulled back slightly. What? I heard you outside. On the phone. Who was it? She smiled. Just my cousin. She's been having problems with her husband. I was just trying to help. I nodded. Your cousin? Yeah. Why? I shook my head. No reason. She kissed me. You worry too much. Maybe I did. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the divorce had broken something in me and now I saw lies everywhere, even where there were none. That night, she fell asleep in my arms. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe. I thought about the phone. I thought about her mother I'd never met. I thought about the money disappearing from my account. I thought about all the little things that didn't quite add up, And I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself she loved me. I told myself I was lucky, because the alternative was too painful. The alternative was that I'd been played, and I couldn't accept that. Not yet. So I held her tighter and closed my eyes and tried to sleep. But the doubt was there. Quiet, persistent, growing. I found it on a Wednesday morning. Grace had gone to the market. Miguel was at school. I was alone in the house, looking for my reading glasses. I thought maybe I'd left them in the bedroom. I checked the nightstand, under the bed, on top of the dresser. Nothing. Then I saw her makeup bag sitting on the dresser, half open. I almost didn't look inside. Almost. But something made me. Maybe it was the phone. Maybe it was all those little inconsistencies piling up. Maybe it was just intuition. I unzipped the bag. Lipstick, powder, eyeliner. And underneath, tucked between a compact mirror and a small bottle of perfume, a laminated government ID. I picked it up. The photo was Grace. Younger, maybe, but unmistakably her. The name matched. Grace Dela Cruz. But the birth date, the 14th of October, 1977. I stared at it. I read it again. The 14th of October, 1977. I did the math in my head. Once, twice, 3 times. That made her 47, not 32, not 34. 47 years old. I sat down on the edge of the bed, still holding the ID, my hands shaking. Why would she lie about her age? What else had she lied about? The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. I couldn't breathe right. I heard the gate creak open outside, footsteps on the gravel. Grace was back. I stood up, still holding the ID. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. The door opened. She walked in carrying plastic bags, humming. She saw me standing there, saw what I was holding. Her face didn't change. She didn't panic. She didn't cry. She just set the bags down slowly and looked at me. "Clifton," she said. Her voice was calm, almost cold. I held up the ID. "Grace, we need to talk." She crossed her arms. "Where did you find that? Does it matter?" "You were going through my things. You lied to me." She didn't respond. I took a step closer. "You told me you were 32. This says you're 47. She looked away. So? That's 15 years, Grace. That's not a small lie." She turned back to me, her eyes hard. "I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That you wouldn't want me if you knew." Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "Men like you don't want women my age. You want young girls who make you feel good about yourself. So I told you what you wanted to hear." I felt like I'd been punched. "That's not fair, isn't it?" She took a step toward me. "You think I don't know why you came here? You think I don't know what you were looking for?" A younger woman. Someone who'd make you feel like a man again. Someone who wouldn't remind you that you're 65 and alone. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. She kept going. "I gave you what you wanted. I made you happy. I made you feel needed. And now you're upset because I'm not 25? I shook my head. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" I looked down at the ID, then back at her. "I just want the truth." She laughed. It was a bitter sound. "The truth. You want the truth? Fine. I'm 47. I have a hard life. I have bills I can't pay and a kid I can barely feed. When I met you, I saw a chance to make things easier. So I took it. That's the truth." I felt something break inside me. Not anger, not even hurt, just a kind of cold realization. "So you were using me." She didn't deny it. She just looked at me, her face unreadable. I was surviving. I sat back down on the bed. My legs didn't feel steady anymore. Grace stood there for a long moment, watching me. Then she spoke, softer this time. "I do care about you, Clifton. I do. But I'm not going to apologize for doing what I had to do." I looked up at her. "What else did you lie about?" "What do you mean?" I stood up again, my voice shaking. "What else, Grace? Is Miguel even your son?" Her face changed, Just a flicker. But I saw it. Of course he is. I don't believe you. That's your problem. I walked past her, into the living room. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to think. She followed me. Where are you going? I don't know. Clifton. I turned to face her. Just tell me the truth. All of it, please. She stared at me for a long time. Then she sighed. Miguel is my sister's son, my nephew. She died 2 years ago and I've been taking care of him. I felt the last piece of my hope crumble. So you lied about that too. I needed you to think I was a widow, a single mother. Men like that story. It makes them want to help. I laughed. It came out harsh and broken. Men like me. Yes. We stood there in silence. The fan whirred above us. Outside, a dog barked. A motorcycle passed. Life kept moving even though mine had just stopped. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized I didn't know this woman at all. I'd been in love with a version of her that never existed. A 32-year-old widow with a sad story and a soft smile. But that woman wasn't real. This woman, standing in front of me with her arms crossed and her face hard, this was real. And I didn't know her at all. I need some time, I said quietly. She nodded. Okay. I walked outside and sat on the porch steps. The sun was high and brutal. The heat pressed down on me. I put my head in my hands and tried to make sense of it, but there was no sense to make. She'd lied. About her age, about Miguel, about everything. And I'd believed it all because I'd wanted to. Because I'd been so lonely, so desperate for connection, that I'd ignored every warning sign. I heard the door open behind me. Grace sat down next to me, not too close, just close enough. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't look at her. Are you? She was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry you're hurt. I didn't want that. But you're not sorry you lied. She didn't answer. We sat there in silence, two strangers pretending they'd ever known each other. And I realized something. This was it. This was the moment I had to decide. Stay and pretend, or leave and start over. Again. I already knew what I had to do. I just didn't have the strength to do it yet. We didn't talk for the rest of the day. Grace stayed in the bedroom. I stayed on the couch. Miguel came home from school and I could tell he sensed something was wrong. He looked at me, then at the closed bedroom door, then back at me. He didn't say anything, just went to his room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the ID, the birth date, the lies. I kept trying to make it make sense, to find a way to rationalize it, but I couldn't. Around midnight, Grace came out. She sat on the edge of the couch. Can we talk? I sat up. Yeah. She took a breath. I need to tell you something else. My stomach dropped. What? The phone you saw. The second phone. So she knew I'd found it. What about it? She looked down at her hands. I've been talking to other men. Online. Foreign men. Sending messages. Pictures. They send me money. I felt like the room was spinning. What? Not for sex. Not like that. Just talking. Being friendly. They send money and I talk to them. That's it. How many men? She hesitated. I don't know. 5, maybe 6. Jesus, Grace. I stopped when you got here, I swear. I haven't talked to any of them since we started. Do you expect me to believe that? She met my eyes. It's the truth. I stopped because I thought maybe this could be real. Maybe I wouldn't need to do that anymore. I stood up, pacing. This is insane. You lied about your age. You lied about Miguel. You've been taking my money and talking to other men behind my back. I told you. I stopped. When? When did you stop? She didn't answer. Grace. A month ago. I stopped a month ago. I laughed. It was a hollow sound. So for the first month I was here, you were still doing it. I had to make sure you were real, that you weren't going to leave. And the money I sent you? The $800 for tuition? The $500 for your mother? Where did that go? Her jaw tightened. I used it. For what? For bills. For food. For everything. Show me. What? Show me the receipts. Show me the school papers. Show me proof that Miguel's tuition is paid, that your mother got her medicine." She stood up. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I want to know the truth. For once, I want to know what happened to my money." She crossed her arms. "It's not your money. You gave it to me. I gave it to you for specific things, and I used it for what I needed. That's how it works here. You foreigners come in thinking you can control everything, thinking you can buy people. I wasn't trying to buy you." "Really? Then why did you give me money every time I asked? Why did you pay for everything? Because you cared? Or because it made you feel good?" I didn't have an answer. She kept going. "You think you're so generous, so kind, but you were buying me, Clifton. You were buying a fantasy. A pretty girl who needed you, who made you feel important, and I let you. Because I needed to survive." Her words cut through me, because part of me knew she was right. I had wanted to be needed. I had wanted to feel important. But that didn't make what she did okay. "You're right," I said quietly. "I wanted to feel needed. But that doesn't excuse lying. It doesn't excuse taking my money under false pretenses." She softened a little. "I know. Do you love me?" I asked. The question hung in the air between us. She looked away. "I care about you." "That's not what I asked." "I don't know, Clifton. I don't know what love is supposed to feel like anymore." I nodded. That was answer enough. I sat back down on the couch. My chest felt tight. My hands felt cold. Everything felt wrong. "I can't do this," I said. She sat next to me. "What do you mean?" "I can't keep pretending. I can't keep wondering if you're lying. I can't keep looking at you and not knowing who you are." "So what are you saying?" I looked at her. "I'm saying I think I need to leave." Her face didn't change. She just nodded slowly. "Okay, okay. If that's what you need to do." I waited for her to fight, to cry, to beg me to stay. But she didn't. She just sat there, calm and distant, like I was already gone. That hurt more than anything. The fact that she didn't care enough to fight for me. Or maybe she'd never cared at all. I stood up. "I'll book a flight tomorrow." She nodded again. "Okay." I went to the bedroom and started packing my suitcase. Grace didn't follow. She stayed in the living room, the fan whirring above her, the darkness pressing in. I threw clothes into the suitcase, not caring how they folded, not caring about anything. I just wanted out. I wanted to go home, wherever that was. The next morning I booked a flight for 3 days later, the soonest I could get. Grace made breakfast like nothing had happened. Miguel ate in silence. I barely touched my food. The days passed slowly. I spent most of my time outside, sitting on the porch, avoiding Grace. She didn't try to talk to me. She went about her routine. Cooking, cleaning, taking Miguel to school. It was like I was already gone. On my last night, I was sitting on the porch alone. The sun had set and the neighborhood was settling into its evening rhythm. Dogs barking, TVs playing, the distant sound of karaoke. Miguel came out. He was holding something, a small notebook. He walked up to me and held it out. I took it. "What's this?" He didn't answer, just looked at me with those dark, serious eyes. Then he turned and went back inside. I opened the notebook. Inside were dates, amounts, names. I recognized some of the amounts. $800, Miguel tuition. But next to it was a different name. Not a school, a person, $500, Grace Mother Medicine. But next to it, another name, a man's name. I flipped through the pages. There were more, so many more. Names I didn't recognize, dates going back months, addresses in Manila, Cebu, Davao, money from me, money from others. I felt sick. Grace had been running this operation long before I arrived, and I was just one of many. I looked up. Grace was standing in the doorway. She saw the notebook in my hands. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me. Then she turned and walked away. I sat there for a long time, holding that notebook, feeling the weight of it, feeling the weight of everything. The truth wasn't that Grace was evil. The truth was that she was surviving, and I'd been foolish enough to think I was special. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on that porch, listening to the sounds of Nueva Ecija, thinking about all the things I'd wanted to believe, all the lies I'd told myself, because the truth is, I knew. Somewhere deep down I knew something was off. I saw the red flags, I felt the inconsistencies, but I ignored them, because I was lonely, because I was desperate, because I wanted so badly for this to be real that I convinced myself it was, and that was my fault. Not hers, mine. At dawn, I put the notebook in my suitcase, not as evidence, not as proof, just as a reminder. A reminder of what happens when you believe what you want to believe instead of what's true. I landed in Tampa on a Tuesday afternoon. The airport felt too bright, too loud, too American. I collected my suitcase and walked outside into the humid Florida heat. It felt different from the Philippines. Sharper, somehow. Less forgiving. I took an Uber back to the storage unit where I'd kept some of my things. Boxes of books, old furniture, a few pieces of my life I hadn't been able to part with. I'd sold the house, but I'd rented a small apartment before I left. 1 bedroom, nothing special. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled like stale air and old carpet. I set my suitcase down and looked around. Bare walls, empty shelves, a single chair facing a window that looked out onto a parking lot. This was home now. I sat down in the chair and stared out the window. Cars coming and going, people living their lives. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I'd sent Grace a total of $18,000 over 6 months. $18,000. I could have bought a car. I could have traveled. I could have invested it. Instead, I'd given it to a woman who lied about her age, her family, and her feelings. The smart thing would be to hate her, to be angry, to want revenge. But I didn't feel any of that. I just felt tired. I thought about Grace. I wondered if she was thinking about me. Probably not. She was probably already moving on to the next guy, the next lonely foreigner looking for connection in a foreign country. I didn't blame her. Not really. She did what she had to do to survive, and I did what I had to do. I believed. That was my mistake, not hers, mine. The weeks passed slowly. I got a part-time job at a hardware store just to have something to do. The manager was a guy in his 40s who didn't ask too many questions. I spent my days stocking shelves and helping customers find the right size screws. It was simple, mindless, exactly what I needed. At night, I'd come home to my empty apartment and make dinner. Pasta, usually. Sometimes a sandwich. I'd eat alone, watching TV shows I didn't care about, and then I'd go to bed. The routine was numbing, but that was the point. I needed to be numb for a while. I needed to not feel. One night, I was lying in bed when my phone buzzed. A message from Grace. "I'm sorry." That was it. Just 2 words. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond, to ask her what she was sorry for lying, for using me, for breaking my heart, but I didn't. I just deleted the message and put the phone down. There was nothing left to say. Another week passed, then another. I started to feel a little more human, a little more like myself. I went to a therapist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a calm voice. She asked me about Tampa, about my divorce, about Grace. I told her everything. When I finished, she said, "You were looking for something, yeah, and you thought you found it." I nodded, but it wasn't real. She leaned back in her chair. Was any of it real? I thought about that. About the mornings Grace made me breakfast. About the nights we sat on the porch. About the way she held my hand in that jeepney. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe it doesn't matter." "What do you mean?" She smiled gently. "Real or not, you felt something. You allowed yourself to be vulnerable, to hope. That's not nothing." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that it wasn't all a waste, that I'd learned something, that I'd grown. "Do you think I'll ever trust someone again?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I think you'll learn to trust yourself again, and that's more important." I left her office feeling lighter somehow, not healed, but less broken. I started going for walks, around the neighborhood, down to the water. I'd sit on a bench and watch the boats go by, thinking about everything, about Grace, about my ex-wife, about the life I'd built and lost and tried to build again. I thought about Miguel too. I hoped he was okay. I hoped he'd get out of Nueva Ecija someday. Find something better, something real. One afternoon, I was sitting in my apartment when I pulled out the notebook, Miguel's notebook. I flipped through the pages, looking at the names, the dates, the amounts, and I realized something. This wasn't about me. It had never been about me. Grace was just trying to survive in a world that didn't care if she did or not. And I'd walked into her life with money and loneliness and a desperate need to be needed. Of course she'd taken advantage. Who wouldn't? I closed the notebook and put it in a drawer. I didn't need it anymore. I thought about calling Grace, just to check in, to see if she was okay. But I didn't, because that wasn't my role anymore. She wasn't my responsibility. I wasn't her savior. That was over. Instead, I called my daughter, the one I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. She answered on the third ring. "Dad? Hey, sweetheart." There was a long pause. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah. I just wanted to call, to say hi, to see how you're doing." Another pause. Then, softly, "I'm good, Dad. How are you?" I smiled. "I'm okay. I'm figuring it out." We talked for 20 minutes, about her job, her boyfriend, her life. She didn't ask about the Philippines. She didn't ask about Grace. She just talked. And I listened. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not for romance. Not for adventure. Just hope that maybe I could rebuild. Maybe I could start over. Not in a foreign country. Not with a woman half my age. Just here, in Tampa, in my small apartment, with my daughter on the phone. That was enough. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and looked out the window. The sun was setting. The sky was orange and pink. It was beautiful. I thought about Grace one last time. I wondered if she thought about me, if she regretted anything, if she ever really cared. I'd never know. And that was okay. Because the truth is, I didn't need closure. I didn't need her to apologize or explain or tell me it was real. I just needed to forgive myself for being lonely, for being hopeful, for being human. I'm 65 years old. I've been married and divorced. I've fallen in love and been betrayed. I've lost money and time and pieces of myself I'll never get back. But I'm still here. I'm still breathing. I'm still capable of hope. And that's enough. That has to be enough. Because what else is there? I finished my coffee and stood up. Tomorrow I'd go to work. I'd stock shelves. I'd help customers. I'd come home and make dinner and watch TV. And the day after that, I'd do it again. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't the life I'd dreamed of. But it was real. And after everything, after all the lies and illusions and desperate attempts to find meaning in someone else's eyes, real was all I wanted. I turned off the lights and went to bed. Outside, the world kept turning. People fell in love. People lied. People survived. And somewhere in Nueva Ecija, Grace was probably doing the same thing she'd always done, moving forward, finding the next opportunity, living her life. I hoped she was okay. I really did. But more than that, I hoped I'd be okay too. And for the first time in a long time, I thought maybe I would be.